My name is Booth, 28 years old, and nothing beats the feeling of finally having my own place after years of saving every penny. A modest, single-story house that needed work, but it was mine. Freedom from my parents' constant supervision felt like taking my first real breath as an adult. That night, after a grueling shift at the store, I pulled into my driveway and noticed something odd. The lights were on inside. I distinctly remembered turning everything off that morning. Before I continue with what happened that night, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to deal with family overstepping boundaries. I should probably tell you more about myself before diving into what happened that night. I work as a retail manager at a mid-sized electronics store in town. Not exactly glamorous, but I've worked my way up from sales associate to assistant manager and finally to store manager over the past 6 years. The pay isn't amazing, but I've always been careful with money. I picked up extra shifts whenever possible, worked holidays, and even took a second job delivering food on weekends for almost 2 years straight. All with one goal in mind, saving enough for a down payment on my own place. The house hunting process was exhausting. For months, I scoured listings, visited open houses, and dealt with real estate agents who seemed more interested in their commission than finding me something that fit my modest budget. Then one day I stumbled upon this small house in an older neighborhood. It wasn't fancy by any means, but something about it just felt right. My house is a single story with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a small kitchen that opens to a cozy living room, and a backyard that's not much bigger than a postage stamp. The previous owners were an elderly couple who had lived there for over 40 years, and while they had maintained the essentials, the place definitely needed updates. The kitchen cabinets were from the 1980s, the bathroom had seen better days, and the carpeting throughout the house was worn and dated. But beneath all that I could see the potential. Hardwood floors under the carpet, solid construction, and a layout that made the small space feel open and welcoming. Getting approved for the mortgage was another battle entirely. As a single guy with decent but not stellar credit, the banks weren't exactly rolling out the red carpet. I had to provide endless documentation proving I could handle the monthly payments. When I finally got approved and signed all the paperwork, the feeling was indescribable. I remember standing in the empty living room after closing key in hand, hardly believing this space was actually mine. Now about my parents. Patricia and Richard have always been involved, maybe too involved. Growing up, my mom monitored my homework, my friendships, even the clothes I wore well into high school. Nothing was ever private. My drawers were regularly searched, my phone checked, all under the guise of keeping me safe. Dad wasn't quite as hands-on, but he set impossibly high standards. Second place was never good enough. A minus meant I hadn't tried hard enough. Every decision I made was scrutinized and often criticized. Mom Patricia is a former elementary school teacher who retired early to focus on family, which really meant focusing on controlling every aspect of my life. She has this way of making suggestions that aren't really suggestions at all, but commands wrapped in a sweet, concerned voice. "Honey, don't you think you should?" was her favorite phrase. And disagreeing meant hours of subtle guilt trips and passive-aggressive comments. Dad Richard works as an engineering manager and approaches parenting like one of his projects. Everything needs to be optimized, improved, and measured against strict standards. When I was younger, he created charts to track my grades, my chores, even my extracurricular achievements. Nothing was ever quite good enough, and he always found ways to point out how I could have done better. Breaking free from their influence was a years-long process. College helped, even though I stayed local and lived at home to save money. Getting my first apartment after graduation was a start, but they still had a key for emergencies and would drop by unannounced regularly. Moving across town to a second apartment helped create some distance, but they still felt entitled to offer unsolicited advice on everything from my career to my dating life. When I told them I was buying a house, their reaction was predictably underwhelming. Mom immediately asked if I was sure I could handle such a big responsibility. Dad wanted to see the inspection reports and questioned whether I'd gotten a good deal. Neither of them congratulated me until days later, almost as an afterthought. "Are you sure this is the right time to buy with the market the way it is?" Dad had asked, frowning over the listing photos I'd proudly shown him. "Wouldn't it make more sense to keep renting until you find something in a better neighborhood?" Mom chimed in, not even trying to hide her disapproval. Neither of them came to the closing or helped me move in. They claimed they were busy, but I knew the truth. They couldn't bear to see tangible proof that I was capable of making major life decisions without their input. This house represented something they had been fighting against for years, my complete independence. Moving into my own house felt like stepping into a new dimension. For the first time ever, I could make decisions about my living space without anyone second-guessing me. "Want to hang that movie poster in the living room?" "Done. Leave dishes in the sink overnight." "No problem. Play music at 8 in the morning on a Saturday." "Absolutely." The moving process itself was chaotic but exhilarating. I didn't own much furniture from my apartment days, just a bed, a couch, a TV stand, and a small dining table with 2 chairs. Friends from work helped me move the basics, and we celebrated afterward with pizza and beer on the empty living room floor. That first night in the house, sitting among half-unpacked boxes with a cold beer in hand, I felt a sense of achievement that nothing in my life had ever matched. Those first few weeks were a crash course in homeownership. I discovered I knew almost nothing about basic maintenance tasks. When the bathroom sink started leaking, I spent an hour watching tutorial videos before attempting a repair. I flooded the bathroom, had to call a plumber anyway, and learned an expensive lesson. But it was my mistake to make. No one was standing over my shoulder telling me I should have known better. Cooking for myself became a new adventure. In my apartment, I'd relied heavily on microwave meals and takeout. Now, with a proper kitchen, I started teaching myself to cook. There were disasters like the time I set off the smoke detector trying to sear a steak, or when I realized halfway through a recipe that I needed kitchen tools I didn't own. But there were victories too. The first time I successfully made my grandmother's pasta sauce recipe from scratch, I took a picture and almost sent it to my parents before deciding to keep that small triumph to myself. Cleaning and maintaining an entire house proved more challenging than I expected. Weekends that once involved sleeping in, and video games now included mowing the small lawn, cleaning gutters, and figuring out which mysterious switch controlled which light fixture. It was exhausting sometimes, but it was also deeply satisfying to see the improvements, however small, that came from my own efforts. Despite the physical distance, my mom still found ways to stay involved in my daily life. The phone calls started the day after I moved in. "Did you remember to change your address with the post office?" she asked, without even saying hello. "Yes, Mom. I did that weeks ago," I replied, trying to keep the irritation out of my voice. "What about your car insurance? They need to know your new address, too." "Already done." "Did you introduce yourself to the neighbors? It's important to know who lives around you." The calls continued daily, sometimes multiple times a day. She wanted to know if I was eating properly, sleeping enough, keeping the house clean. Each conversation left me feeling drained and slightly irritated, like I was still a teenager needing supervision rather than a homeowner in his late 20s. Then came the surprise visits. The first time I was in the backyard pulling weeds when I heard my mom calling from the front door. I hadn't given them my new address yet, which meant they must have looked up the property records online. "We were just in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by," she explained, arms full of household items I hadn't asked for. Behind her, my dad surveyed the front yard with a critical eye. "Your lawn could use some work," he commented, instead of saying hello. "The edges need trimming." That first visit set the pattern. They would show up unannounced, usually bearing gifts that doubled as criticism. New curtains because the ones I had chosen let in too much light. A better vacuum cleaner because the one I owned wouldn't handle all this carpet. Each gift came with advice, suggestions, and thinly veiled disapproval. I tried to establish boundaries. "It would be great if you could call before coming over," I suggested after the third surprise visit. "I might be busy or not home." Mom looked hurt. We're family, Booth. Family doesn't need appointments. Dad backed her up. We're just trying to help. This is a big responsibility, and we want to make sure you're handling it properly. Despite my parents' constant intrusions, I was slowly building a life in my new neighborhood. I met my next-door neighbors Mike and Sarah Johnson, a couple in their early 30s who had moved in about a year earlier. Mike worked in IT, and Sarah was a graphic designer who worked from home. They invited me over for a barbecue one weekend, and I found myself relaxing in their company in a way I rarely did around my own family. "Your parents stop by a lot," Sarah commented one evening when we were chatting over the fence. "My mom wanted to do that when we first moved in too. Had to set some firm boundaries." Work was getting busier as well. About a month after I moved in, my district manager offered me a promotion to full-time store manager with a slight bump in pay. The hours were longer, but the extra money would help with all the unexpected expenses that came with home ownership. For the most part, I was happier than I'd ever been. The house was slowly becoming a home reflecting my personality and preferences. I was making friends, advancing in my career, and genuinely enjoying the independence I'd fought so hard to achieve. But then I started noticing odd things around the house, small changes that I couldn't quite explain. A coffee mug that I was sure I'd left in the sink now sitting clean in the cabinet. Books on the shelf rearranged in alphabetical order when I'd always organized them by genre. My mail, which I typically left in a pile on the kitchen counter, neatly sorted and stacked. At first I blamed fatigue and stress. With the new responsibilities at work and the constant demands of home ownership, it made sense that I might be forgetful or confused about small details. But as the occurrences became more frequent and obvious, a different, more unsettling explanation began to form in my mind. The strange occurrences around my house became impossible to ignore. One Tuesday evening I came home from a late shift to find the living room furniture rearranged. The couch had been moved to the opposite wall, and the coffee table was now centered perfectly in front of it. I stood in the doorway, keys still in hand, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I lived alone. No one else had a key. At least, no one was supposed to have a key. Other changes were subtler but equally disturbing. Food I didn't remember buying appeared in my refrigerator. A new set of kitchen towels replaced my old ones. The bathroom was spotless, even though I hadn't cleaned it in days. Each discovery sent a chill down my spine. At first I tried to rationalize these events. Maybe I had moved the furniture during a late-night rearranging spree and simply forgotten. Maybe I had bought those groceries during a particularly exhausted shopping trip. But the explanations felt hollow, especially when I found my laundry washed, folded, and organized by color in my dresser drawers. I began to wonder if I was experiencing some kind of stress-induced memory loss, or even early-onset dementia. The thought terrified me enough that I started keeping notes on my phone documenting where I left things before leaving for work and checking them when I returned. The results confirmed my fears someone was definitely entering my house while I was away. My next thought was burglary, but nothing was ever missing. In fact, things were being added rather than taken. I checked all the windows and doors for signs of forced entry but found nothing. The locks were intact, the windows secured. Whoever was coming into my house had a key. I decided to talk to Mike next door about the situation. We were chatting over the fence one evening when I brought it up as casually as I could. "Hey, have you noticed anyone hanging around my house during the day, when I'm at work?" Mike thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, I've seen a car in your driveway a few times. Older model sedan, dark blue. I assumed it was family or friends." My stomach dropped. My mother drove a dark blue Toyota Camry. "Did you happen to see who was driving?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Middle-aged woman a couple times. Once I think there was a man with her. They had keys, so I didn't think anything of it." Mike must have noticed my expression because he added, "Is everything okay?" I gave him a brief explanation about my suspicions that someone was entering my house without permission. I deliberately left out that I suspected my parents. It felt too embarrassing to admit. "Dude, that's messed up. Mike said, looking concerned. You should get a security camera. They're not even that expensive anymore. Sarah and I got one after someone stole a package off our porch last year. That night I ordered a simple security camera system online. It wasn't anything fancy, just a doorbell camera and 2 additional cameras for the back door and living room. The system would alert my phone when it detected motion and record footage I could review later. It would arrive in 2 days. Before the cameras could be delivered, however, the phone calls from my mother took on a new, unsettling quality. She started asking pointed questions about my schedule. "What time do you usually get home from work these days?" she asked during one call. "It varies," I answered vaguely. "Why?" "Just wondering. You're working so hard lately. I worry you're not taking care of yourself properly." Another day. "Do you go straight home after work, or do you run errands?" "Sometimes I stop at the grocery store or gym. It depends on the day." I was becoming increasingly guarded in our conversations. "And Fridays. You used to go out with friends on Fridays. Do you still do that?" The questions were too specific, too focused on when I would or wouldn't be home. Combined with the mysterious changes in my house, my suspicion that my parents were involved grew stronger by the day. I started varying my routine, leaving work at different times, taking different routes home. One day I told my assistant manager I had a doctor's appointment, but instead parked down the street from my house and waited watching. After an hour of sitting in my car and seeing nothing unusual, I felt slightly ridiculous. Maybe I was being paranoid after all. But the evidence kept mounting. A new shower curtain appeared in my bathroom, replacing the plain white one I'd bought. The lawn got mowed on a Tuesday when I was certain I'd planned to do it over the weekend. My kitchen spices, which I kept in a jumbled drawer, were alphabetized and transferred to a spice rack I didn't recognize. The stress began affecting other areas of my life. At work, I found myself distracted, checking my phone constantly for alerts from the security system that hadn't arrived yet. My sleep suffered as I lay awake listening for sounds of intrusion. I started leaving work unfinished and rushing home, half expecting to catch someone in the act. Mike noticed the change in my demeanor. "You look wrecked, man," he commented one evening when I was checking my mail. "Everything okay with the house situation?" "The cameras should be here tomorrow," I replied, rubbing my tired eyes. "Then I'll have proof one way or another. If you need backup when you confront whoever it is, Sarah and I are right next door," he offered. The support meant more to me than he probably realized. That night I got a text from my district manager asking if everything was all right. Apparently my job performance had noticeably declined over the past couple of weeks. I assured him it was just temporary stress from settling into homeownership and promised to do better. But as I sent the text, I wondered how much longer I could function under this constant anxiety. The security system arrived on Thursday, but I didn't have time to set it up before work. I left the package inside, planning to install everything that evening. When I returned home that night, the package was gone. I searched every room, every closet, but it had vanished completely. Someone had taken it. That was the final straw. I could no longer deny what was happening or who was responsible. My parents had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. They hadn't just violated my privacy, they had taken active steps to prevent me from protecting it. The realization filled me with a cold, clear anger unlike anything I'd felt before. I knew confrontation was inevitable, but I wanted it to happen on my terms. I formulated a plan. The next day was Friday, and the store was scheduled to close early for some electrical work. No one, not even my parents, knew about this schedule change. It was the perfect opportunity to catch them in the act. Friday arrived with a sense of grim anticipation. At work, I went through the motions, mechanically checking inventory and helping customers while my mind remained fixed on what might be happening at my house. When the electricians arrived at 3 in the afternoon, I helped lock up the store and headed to my car. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips as I gripped the steering wheel. Instead of driving straight home, I took a circuitous route through town, partly to collect my thoughts and partly to approach my neighborhood from an unexpected direction. As I turned onto my street, I immediately spotted my parents' dark blue Toyota Camry parked about 4 houses down from mine. They hadn't even bothered to park in the driveway, probably thinking I wouldn't be home for hours yet. I pulled into a spot several houses away, cut the engine, and sat there for a moment, breathing deeply. Then I got out and walked quietly toward my house. Using the side gate, I slipped into my backyard, moving carefully to avoid making noise. The back door had a small window, and through it I could see movement in the kitchen. Someone was there. Using my key, I unlocked the door as silently as possible and stepped inside. From the kitchen, I heard the familiar sound of my mother humming to herself, something she always did while cleaning. I moved through the hallway and into the living room, where I found my father sitting comfortably in my armchair reading a newspaper as if he were in his own home. For a moment, neither of us moved. He glanced up, saw me standing there, and his expression shifted from relaxation to surprise to something like defiance. "Booth," he said, folding the newspaper calmly, "you're home early." His casual tone, as if there was nothing unusual about him being in my house without my knowledge or permission, made my blood boil. Before I could respond, my mother walked in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Did you say something, Richard?" she asked, then stopped short when she saw me. "Oh, Booth, honey, what are you doing home already?" "I think that's my question," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "What are you doing in my house?" They exchanged a look that spoke volumes. My father cleared his throat. "Your mother was just helping tidy up a bit. We know how busy you are with work." "With a key you don't have," I pointed out, "that I never gave you." Another exchange of glances. My mother's smile turned slightly strained. "We had a copy made from your spare when you showed us the house. For emergencies." The casual admission that they had copied my key without permission stunned me into momentary silence. I looked around the living room and noticed small changes everywhere. New curtains on the windows, a different throw blanket on the couch, a plant I didn't recognize on the side table. "How many times have you been here when I wasn't home?" I asked, though I already knew the answer would be disturbing. My mother waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, just now and then. To check on things, make sure you're keeping up with everything. You know how challenging homeownership can be for someone just starting out." "I'm 28 years old," I said flatly. "I don't need you to check on me or clean my house or rearrange my furniture. We're just trying to help son." My father interjected his tone, taking on that familiar, patronizing quality I'd heard all my life. "This is a big responsibility, and we want to make sure you're handling it properly. By breaking into my house, by taking the security system I ordered." My mother at least had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "We didn't think you needed that. It was an unnecessary expense." "It was my expense to make," I countered. "This is my house, my decisions, my life." "Well, about that." My mother exchanged another look with my father before continuing. "We've actually been helping with the mortgage payments. Didn't you notice the extra deposits in your account each month?" The revelation hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't been monitoring my account as closely as I should have been, focused as I was on settling into the house and my new responsibilities at work. But now that she mentioned it, I remembered seeing deposits I'd assumed were reimbursements or bonuses from work. "You've been putting money into my account without telling me." "We wanted to help my father," said as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. "Property taxes, insurance, maintenance costs. It all adds up. We didn't think you'd calculated everything properly. So you just decided to secretly subsidize me." Without asking, I was struggling to comprehend the level of boundary violation I was experiencing. "We're your parents, Booth," my mother said, her voice taking on that hurt tone she used whenever I challenged her control. "We're allowed to help our son." "Not like this," I insisted. "Not by sneaking around behind my back, entering my house, without permission, making decisions about my property, without consulting me." "About that," my father interjected, leaning forward in his chair. "Given our financial contribution, we thought it made sense to add my name to the property deed. Just as a precaution, you understand." to protect the investment. I felt like I couldn't breathe. The room seemed to tilt sideways as the implications of what he was saying sank in. You? What? It's really for the best, honey, my mother added, stepping closer and placing her hand on my arm. I flinched away from her touch. This way it's a family property. We can all make decisions about improvements, maintenance, even eventual resale value. I didn't agree to any of this, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You didn't have to, my father replied confidently. As your parents, we're looking out for your best interests. Always have. My mother, seemingly oblivious to my distress, began enthusiastically outlining their plans for my house. We're thinking the kitchen needs updating first. Those cabinets are so dated, and the bathroom really should be completely redone. Richard knows a contractor who can give us a good deal. The backyard has potential too, my father chimed in. With some proper landscaping, maybe a deck. They continued talking, mapping out changes to my house, as if I weren't standing there, as if my opinion didn't matter at all. The house I had worked so hard for, saved for years to buy, was being claimed right in front of me. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The shock and hurt crystallized into a calm, cold resolve. I knew exactly what I needed to do. We'll see about that, I said, quietly interrupting their planning. Both my parents stopped talking and looked at me in surprise. What was that, honey? My mother asked. I said, we'll see about that. My voice was steady now, controlled. I'd like to see any documentation proving Dad's name is on the deed, and the records of these payments you've been making. They exchanged another glance, this one more uncertain. Well, the deed modification is still being processed, my father admitted. But I have receipts for the transfers to your account. Show me, I demanded. My father reached for his phone, fumbling slightly as he pulled up his banking app. He showed me a series of transfers, bi-weekly deposits of varying amounts into my account over the past 3 months. And the deed paperwork, I pressed. That's still with our lawyer, he said, not meeting my eyes directly. So there is no deed modification, I concluded. You haven't actually added your name to my property. Not yet, but it's in process, he insisted, though, with less conviction than before. I want both of you to leave, I said calmly. And I want my keys back. All copies. Booth, don't be ridiculous, my mother said, her voice rising slightly. We're just trying to help. I didn't ask for your help. I didn't want your money. And I certainly didn't agree to share ownership of my home with you. Now please leave. Son, you're overreacting. My father tried again. Let's discuss this rationally. There's nothing to discuss, I replied. This is my house. I bought it. I pay the mortgage. I make the decisions about it. If you can't respect that, then we have nothing more to say to each other right now. My mother's eyes filled with tears, her go-to response whenever she didn't get her way. I can't believe you're treating us like this after everything we've done for you. What you've done is violate my privacy and my trust, I said, unmoved by the display. Please leave. We can talk again when everyone has calmed down. Reluctantly, they gathered their things. My father handed over a key ring with 2 copies of my house key, though I suspected there might be more I didn't know about. As they walked to the door, my mother turned back, her expression a mixture of hurt and indignation. We only wanted what's best for you, Booth. We always have. I held the door open without responding. Once they had driven away, I closed it, locked it, and for the first time since moving in, used the deadbolt I'd never felt the need to engage before. After my parents left, the silence in the house felt oppressive. I walked from room to room, seeing everything through new eyes. The curtains my mother had hung, the throw pillows she had selected, the plants she had placed strategically around the living room. None of it was mine. None of it reflected my choices or my taste. My house, the symbol of my independence, had been quietly colonized. In the kitchen, I found evidence of my mother's presence everywhere. The inside of the refrigerator had been reorganized, the pantry shelves lined with contact paper. Even the mugs in the cabinet had been rearranged by size and color. I opened a drawer and found my utensils nested in a new organizer I hadn't purchased. The bathroom was spotless, smelling of the same lemon cleaner my mother had used in our house growing up. The medicine cabinet had been organized, old prescriptions thrown out, new first aid supplies added. A fresh toothbrush still in its packaging sat on the counter with a note in my mother's handwriting, "Time to replace the old one." In my bedroom, I discovered the most disturbing violations. My closet had been reorganized, clothes hung by type and color. The dresser drawers contained neatly folded items, arranged in a way I never would have done myself. On the bedside table sat a framed photo of our family that I'd deliberately left packed away. Next to it was a book on home maintenance with numerous pages bookmarked. The weight of these discoveries crashed over me all at once. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands shaking, and tried to process what had happened. My parents hadn't just entered my house without permission. They had systematically erased my presence from it. Every choice I had made, from how to organize my kitchen to what photos to display, had been overridden. They had treated my house as an extension of their own, a space where their preferences trumped mine. And then there was the financial bombshell. I grabbed my laptop and logged into my bank account, scrolling through months of transactions. Sure enough, there they were, regular deposits from Richard Booth Sr. that I had somehow overlooked or misinterpreted. The amounts varied from $200 to $500, adding up to several thousand over 3 months. Money I hadn't asked for, didn't need, and that now felt like a trap designed to maintain control over me. The claim about adding my father's name to the deed was what truly stunned me. Even if they hadn't succeeded yet, the fact that they had tried, or at least claimed to have tried, revealed the extent of their disrespect for my autonomy. They didn't see me as an adult capable of owning property. They saw me as a child playing house, needing their supervision and intervention. Anger, hurt, and betrayal swirled together into a toxic mixture that made it hard to breathe. I thought about all the times in my life when my parents had undermined my independence. The college applications they filled out for me. The job interviews my father had helped me prepare for by telling me exactly what to say. The relationships my mother had sabotaged with her constant criticism and interference. This wasn't new behavior. It was just the latest and most extreme example of a lifelong pattern. The calm I had maintained during the confrontation evaporated. I grabbed a pillow and screamed into it until my throat hurt. Then I paced the house, alternating between rage and disbelief. How could they do this? What gave them the right? And perhaps most disturbing, how had I not noticed sooner? At some point, my phone began ringing. My mother's name appeared on the screen. I silenced it without answering. She called again and again. Text messages followed. "Booth, please answer your phone. We need to talk about this like adults. Your father and I are very concerned about you." The audacity of that last message sent me into another spiral of anger. They were concerned about me, after what they had done. Eventually, I turned off my phone completely. I needed space to think, to process, to decide what to do next. My parents had violated my boundaries in ways I couldn't ignore or forgive easily. But what was my recourse? How could I ensure this never happened again? As the initial shock began to fade, my mind turned toward practical matters. First, I needed to change the locks. Even if they had returned the keys they admitted to having, I couldn't be sure there weren't other copies. Second, I needed to understand exactly what legal rights I had and what actions my parents might have taken regarding the deed to my house. And finally, I needed to address the financial issue. The money they had deposited into my account without my knowledge or consent was a complication I couldn't ignore. It represented yet another attempt to maintain control, to create obligation, to ensure I remained dependent in some way. I spent the rest of the evening alternating between practical planning and emotional processing. I called a locksmith and scheduled an appointment for the following morning. I researched property laws in my state, trying to understand if it was even possible for someone to add their name to a deed without the primary owner's consent. Everything I read suggested it wasn't, which meant my father had either been bluffing or attempting something potentially fraudulent. Around midnight, exhausted but still too wound up to sleep, I walked next door to talk to Mike. Despite the late hour, he invited me in, and over a beer I told him everything. The secret key copies, the unauthorized entries, the financial interference, the attempt to claim partial ownership of my house. "Dude," he said when I finished, "that's not just crossing boundaries. That's like illegal, breaking and entering. Maybe even attempted fraud with the deed thing." I know I sighed, but they're my parents. I can't exactly call the cops on them. "Maybe not, but you need to protect yourself," Mike advised. "Change the locks definitely. Get a security system they can't remove, and talk to a lawyer about the money and the deed situation." Sarah, who had joined us halfway through the conversation, nodded in agreement. "You also need to be very clear about boundaries going forward. No wiggle room, no exceptions." Their support and practical advice helped ground me. By the time I returned home, I had the outline of a plan. I would secure my home, consult with professionals about the legal and financial issues, and prepare for a difficult but necessary conversation with my parents. Not immediately, but once I had everything in order. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I thought about what my mother had said. "It's a family property now." The words echoed in my head, revealing so much about how they viewed me and my place in the world. To them, I wasn't an independent adult with the right to own property and make my own decisions. I was still a child whose achievements belonged partly to them, whose successes were extensions of their own. The realization was painful, but clarifying. This wasn't just about a house. It was about my right to exist as a separate person with my own life, my own choices, my own consequences, and it was about their inability or unwillingness to see me that way. In that moment, lying in the dark, I made a decision. My response to my mother's claim had been simple: "We'll see about that." But what I meant, what I was now fully committed to, was much more comprehensive. We would indeed see about that. We would see about every assumption they had made about their right to control my life. We would see about the kind of relationship we could have if it wasn't based on their authority and my compliance. We would see about all of it, and I would make sure they understood once and for all that I was no longer a child to be managed, but an adult to be respected. The next morning, Saturday, I woke up with a clear head and a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. Before my parents had a chance to contact me again, I called a real estate attorney and scheduled an emergency consultation for that afternoon. Then I called a locksmith, who arrived within the hour to change every lock in the house. "Security issue?" the locksmith asked as he worked on the front door. You could say that I replied, not elaborating further. By noon, I had new keys, a new deadbolt, and a new sense of security. No one, not even my parents, could enter my home without my explicit permission now. Next, I drove to my bank and asked to speak with a personal banker. The young woman who assisted me was professional and discreet as I explained my situation. "I've discovered unauthorized deposits into my account that I need to investigate and potentially return," I explained, showing her the transaction history on my phone. She helped me identify all the deposits from my father over the past 3 months, totaling just over $4,000. The amounts had been irregular enough and mixed in with my legitimate direct deposits that I hadn't noticed them specifically, a costly oversight on my part. "What are my options here?" I asked her. "You can issue a check to return the full amount," she suggested. "But first, I'd recommend speaking with your attorney about the implications, especially if there's a potential property dispute involved." I thanked her for the advice and left with detailed records of every transaction in question. My next stop was a home improvement store where I purchased and paid for installation of a comprehensive security system. Unlike the one my parents had confiscated, this system would be professionally installed that same day with cameras covering every entrance and the main living areas. The system connected to my phone, allowing me to monitor my home from anywhere and receive alerts about any movement. "Will you be using the system when you're home as well, or just when you're away, the sales associate asked as we finalized the details. Both, I said firmly. Security is a priority for me. By the time I arrived at the attorney's office that afternoon, I had taken concrete steps to secure my property physically. Now I needed to understand my legal position and options. The attorney, Jessica Barnes, listened carefully as I explained the situation. I showed her the mortgage documents, the deed in my name only, and the bank records showing my father's unauthorized deposits. Based on what you've told me, your parents have no legal claim to your property, she assured me after reviewing the paperwork. Adding someone to a deed requires notarized signatures from all current owners, which means you would have had to sign off on it. Since you didn't, any claim they make about being on the deed or it being in process is false. What about the money they deposited without my knowledge? Does that give them any claim, I asked? No, it doesn't, she said firmly. Unsolicited gifts don't create ownership rights. However, I would recommend returning the money in full with documentation to remove even the appearance of accepting their financial involvement. She helped me draft a formal letter stating that I was returning all funds deposited by my parents, that I had not requested or agreed to these deposits, and that I did not consent to any financial involvement from them regarding my property. The letter also explicitly stated that my parents did not have permission to enter my home without invitation, make modifications to the property, or represent themselves as having any ownership interest in it. This creates a paper trail, she explained as I signed the document. If they continue to claim some right to your property or enter without permission, this shows you've clearly communicated your position. By early evening, I returned home to find the security system installation complete. The technician walked me through the features, showing me how to arm and disarm the system, review footage, and set up alerts. For the first time since discovering my parents' intrusions, I felt a sense of control returning. I still hadn't turned my phone back on, knowing it would be filled with messages and missed calls from my parents. Instead, I called Mike from my landline and asked if he and Sarah would mind helping me with one more task. Anything you need, man, he said without hesitation. The task was simple but symbolic, removing and replacing everything my parents had added to my house without my permission. The curtains, throw pillows, kitchen organizers, bathroom accessories, and dozens of other small items that represented their attempt to reshape my space into their vision of what it should be. Mike and Sarah came over after dinner, and together we went through the house methodically. Each item my parents had added went into boxes. Each space they had reorganized was restored to how I wanted it. We worked until almost midnight, talking, laughing occasionally, and gradually transforming the house back into my home. What are you going to do with all this stuff? Sarah asked, gesturing to the now full boxes. Return it to them, I replied, along with a check for all the money they deposited. I don't want anything from them that comes with strings attached. That night I slept better than I had in weeks. The security system was armed, the locks were changed, and my home felt like mine again. I had taken concrete steps to reassert control over my property and my life. The next day, Sunday, I turned my phone back on and braced myself for the deluge. 27 missed calls from my mother, 15 from my father, dozens of text messages ranging from concerned to angry to guilt-inducing. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I spent the day creating a financial plan to ensure I could cover all my expenses without any help from my parents. This meant picking up extra shifts at the store, cutting back on non-essential spending, and possibly finding a part-time weekend job temporarily. I was determined to be completely self-sufficient, even if it meant working more hours and making sacrifices in the short term. By Sunday evening, I had a solid plan in place. I would work extra shifts at the store for the next 3 months, using the additional income to build an emergency fund. I would reduce my grocery budget, cancel some streaming subscriptions, and put off some of the home improvements I had planned. It would be challenging but manageable, and most importantly, it would ensure my complete financial independence from my parents. As Monday dawned, I prepared for a busy week ahead. I would need to balance my increased work schedule with the task of thoroughly documenting my home ownership, returning my parents' money and possessions, and eventually having a difficult but necessary conversation with them about boundaries and respect. Mike and Sarah continued to offer support, helping me install additional security features like motion sensor lights around the perimeter of the house and reinforced door frames. Their friendship and practical assistance made me realize how different healthy relationships could be from the controlling dynamic I had grown up with. "You know," Mike commented, as we finished installing the last light, "what your parents did isn't normal. Parents are supposed to want their kids to be independent, not try to keep them under their thumb forever." His words resonated deeply. For so long I had accepted my parents' behavior as normal if frustrating. Now I was beginning to see just how abnormal and unhealthy it truly was. The week passed in a blur of work planning and preparation. I avoided my parents' continued attempts to contact me, focusing instead on strengthening my position. By Friday, exactly 1 week after the confrontation, I felt ready to take the next step. I had the letter from my attorney, a cashier's check for the full amount my father had deposited, and boxes of all the items they had placed in my home without permission. It was time to face them again, but this time on my terms with clear boundaries and consequences. I sent a brief text message to both of them. "I'm ready to talk. My house Sunday at 2 p.m. Please come prepared to listen. No unannounced visits before then." Their responses were immediate and predictable. My mother: "Finally. We've been so worried, my father. Good. We have a lot to discuss." Neither seemed to recognize that this conversation would be very different from any we'd had before. They still expected to set the agenda, to be in control. Sunday would change that expectation permanently. Sunday arrived with clear skies and a sense of nervous anticipation. I spent the morning cleaning my house, arranging the living room furniture, to create a sense of formality and preparing mentally for the conversation ahead. The boxes containing my parents' unauthorized contributions to my home sat neatly stacked by the front door. On the coffee table lay an envelope containing the cashier's check and the letter my attorney had helped me draft. At exactly 2 p.m., the security system alerted me to movement at the front door. Through the camera feed on my phone, I watched my parents approach, noting how my father inspected the new security cameras with a frown. I took a deep breath, disarmed the system, and opened the door before they could knock. "Booth, honey." My mother moved to embrace me, but I stepped back slightly, maintaining my distance. "Come in," I said, gesturing to the living room. "We have a lot to discuss." They entered cautiously, both noticing the boxes by the door and the changes I had made to the house over the past week. All trace of their decorating efforts was gone, replaced by furniture and accessories that reflected my preferences alone. My father's gaze lingered on the security panel by the door, while my mother looked hurt as she registered the return of the original curtains I had chosen. "Please sit down," I said, indicating the couch across from my armchair. I remained standing until they were seated, then took my place opposite them. The dynamic was intentionally different from our previous encounters, where they had typically controlled the physical space and conversation. "First, I want to thank you for respecting my request to wait until today to visit." I began, keeping my voice steady and neutral. I needed time to process what happened and decide how to move forward. My father shifted uncomfortably. "Son, I think you've blown this whole situation out of proportion. We were only trying to help." I held up a hand. "I understand that's how you see it, but I need you to listen to my perspective without interrupting. Can you do that?" The request clearly surprised them both. After a moment, my mother nodded reluctantly. "Of course, honey, we're listening." "What happened last week was not help. It was a violation of my privacy, my property, and my trust," I said firmly. "Entering my home without permission, even with a key, is breaking and entering. Modifying my property without consent is not acceptable. Attempting to add Dad's name to my deed without my knowledge would be fraud. And depositing money into my account to create a financial claim on my house is manipulative at best, predatory at worst." My mother's eyes filled with tears. My father's jaw tightened defensively. Neither interrupted. I understand that you may have had good intentions. You might genuinely believe you were acting in my best interest, but good intentions don't justify harmful actions. And what you did was deeply harmful to me and to our relationship. I reached for the envelope on the coffee table and slid it across to them. This contains a cashier's check for $4,327, the total amount deposited into my account without my knowledge or consent. It also contains a letter reviewed by my attorney, clarifying that I do not accept any financial contribution from you toward my property and do not consent to any claim of ownership or right of entry. My father's face darkened at the mention of an attorney. You got a lawyer involved, against your own parents. I consulted with a professional to understand my legal rights. I corrected calmly, just as I would for any significant legal or financial matter. We don't need lawyers in this family, my father insisted. We can work things out ourselves. That's exactly the problem, I replied. Your idea of working things out means you make decisions about my life without my input or consent. That's not acceptable anymore. I gestured to the boxes by the door. Those contain all the items you brought into my house without my permission. The curtains, kitchen, organizers, bathroom accessories, everything. I'm returning them to you because I did not ask for them and do not want them. My mother was openly crying now. We were just trying to make your house nice, to help you get settled. I know, Mom, but it wasn't your place to decide what nice means for my home. This is my space, my sanctuary. Every item here should be something I chose or accepted freely, not something imposed on me. I took a deep breath before continuing. Going forward, our relationship needs to be based on mutual respect. That means no entering my home without explicit invitation. No financial contributions unless I specifically request them. No decisions about my property, my career, or my personal life without my participation and consent. My father, who had been growing increasingly agitated, finally erupted. This is ridiculous. We're your parents. We have every right to help you, guide you, protect you from making mistakes. No, I said firmly. You don't. I'm 28 years old. I'm a homeowner. I'm a successful store manager. I'm an adult capable of making my own decisions and living with the consequences. Your right to make decisions for me ended many years ago. So what are you saying, my mother asked tearfully, that you don't want us in your life anymore? That's not what I'm saying at all, I clarified, softening my tone slightly. I want you in my life, but I want a healthy relationship based on mutual respect. I want parents who can be proud of my independence rather than threatened by it. I want to visit each other's homes by invitation, not by invasion. I want to share my life with you because I choose to, not because you demand access to every aspect of it. The room fell silent as they absorbed my words. My father looked angry, but also slightly confused, as if he genuinely couldn't understand why I was objecting to their involvement. My mother continued to cry quietly, clutching a tissue. I know this is difficult, I acknowledged after a moment. You've both been deeply involved in every aspect of my life for 28 years. Changing that pattern won't be easy for any of us. But it's necessary if we want to have a healthy relationship moving forward. And if we don't agree to these terms, my father asked, his voice tight, then we'll have very limited contact until you can respect my boundaries. I replied honestly. I don't want that. I love you both. But I can't continue in a relationship that undermines my autonomy and violates my privacy. My mother reached for my hand across the coffee table. I allowed the contact, recognizing her need for connection, even as I maintained my boundaries. We just worry about you, she said softly. We always have. I know, and I appreciate that you care. But worry isn't an excuse to control. Love isn't a justification for invasion. You need to trust that you raised me well enough to make my own decisions, even if they're different from what you would choose. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. There were tears, raised voices, moments of connection, and periods of tense silence. My father struggled the most deeply resistant to the idea that his authority in my life had natural limitations. My mother vacillated between hurt feelings and tentative understanding. By the time they left carrying the boxes of returned items and the envelope with the check, we had reached an uneasy truce. They had agreed, at least verbally, to respect my boundaries going forward. I had promised to stay in regular contact and include them in my life in appropriate ways. Whether they would actually honor these agreements remained to be seen, but it was a start. The following months were challenging. My parents tested boundaries repeatedly, though less flagrantly than before. My mother called daily at first, then gradually adjusted to a more reasonable schedule, as I gently but firmly reinforced my limits. My father attempted to offer unsolicited financial advice at every opportunity, clearly struggling to accept that I could manage my own money successfully. I remained consistent and calm, neither yielding on important boundaries nor using them as weapons to punish or exclude. When they respected my limits, I made efforts to include them in my life in positive ways. I invited them to dinner at my house. I shared updates about my job and home improvements. I asked for advice when I genuinely wanted it, showing that their input was valuable when freely sought, rather than imposed. Slowly, painfully, our relationship began to transform. 6 months after our confrontation, my mother called before visiting for the first time without me having to remind her. My father asked permission before offering suggestions about my lawn care routine. Small steps, but significant ones. The real breakthrough came when I decided to repaint my living room and actually invited their help. My father arrived with his tools but waited for my instructions rather than taking over. My mother brought lunch but didn't rearrange my kitchen while serving it. We worked together as adults, each contributing without anyone dominating the process. A full year after buying my house, I hosted a small housewarming party, inviting close friends and, yes, my parents. As guests arrived, I noticed my mother carrying a carefully wrapped package. "It's not much," she said shyly when I opened it. "Just something we thought might look nice in your home. If you like it, of course. If not, no pressure at all." Inside was a framed family photo, one I had actually mentioned wanting during a recent visit to their house. It was thoughtfully chosen, tastefully framed, and most importantly offered as a gift I could freely accept or decline without consequences. "I love it," I said honestly. "Thank you. I know exactly where I want to display it." That night, surrounded by friends and family in a home that was truly mine, I reflected on how far we had all come. The journey had been painful, fraught with conflict and misunderstanding. There had been moments when I feared our relationship might not survive the transition, but we had persevered, all of us learning and growing in the process. My house was now unquestionably mine, both legally and emotionally. Every item in it was there because I had chosen it or accepted it freely. Every decision about it was mine to make. And yet, paradoxically, I found myself more willing to share it now that my ownership was secure and respected. The most valuable lesson I learned through this difficult experience was that true independence isn't about cutting ties or building walls. It's about establishing healthy boundaries that allow relationships to flourish without suffocation. It's about claiming your own space while still making room for others to visit when invited. It's about the freedom to say both yes and no, and having those choices respected. My parents learned that love doesn't entitle them to control, that respect isn't negotiable, and that our relationship could actually deepen when they recognized my autonomy. I learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish, that independence doesn't preclude connection, and that standing up for myself didn't have to mean losing my family. There are houses built of brick and wood, but a home is built of boundaries and respect. And sometimes to build that home, you must be willing to protect it even from those you love most. Have you ever had to establish difficult boundaries with people who love you, but struggle to respect your independence? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complex family dynamics. I'm grateful for each of you who listened to my journey, and I hope it helps you find the courage to create homes and relationships built on mutual respect and genuine love. Thank you for being here.